The idea that we have made ourselves into gods, through our technology, we have acquired godlike powers, things that earlier prior generations of humans, historical humans, prehistoric humans would regard as either magic or godlike powers. We have them. Millions of us on Earth have them. Um, and so, you know, it feels like something out of Greek myth or something like, why can't we use some of those god powers to heal the goddamn planet? Why can we only destroy with them? Why are they only destructive in their scope, or so often destructive in their scope?
Hey folks, welcome to the latest episode of the Ecosystem Member Podcast. This is our first episode of a new set of recordings after I took a little bit of a break. I recorded a bunch of episodes at the end of 2024 that got us to March with the Aykroyd and Harvey episode, and then I used that break to write a fiction book, exploring all the themes from this podcast. I'm really proud of the result. I put my whole heart into the story, so I'm hoping that one day you'll be able to read it. That means I need to get it published, so if you know a literary agent or a publishing house executive, please send them my way. I think I have something really good on my hands. But today's episode, though, is something I'm also really proud of. I try to be thoughtful about the people I invite on the podcast, and oftentimes I send agents or publicists an email, and I hear nothing back. So I was really ecstatic when I actually heard back from the representatives of today's guests. So today's guest on Ecosystem Member is Dave Longstreth, who's a songwriter, composer, and band leader you probably know best from his most widely known work with the band he created, Dirty Projectors. I came across an article in the New Yorker about Dave's latest project, Song of the Earth, and I knew I had to have him on the podcast. As we talk about in the episode, the piece is ultimately an affirmation and optimistic, but it explores some challenging elements of our relationship with nature, including using a passage from David Wallace-Wells' book, The Uninhabitable Earth, in a song to illuminate some shocking truth about how we treat planet Earth. In addition to exploring the tensions and ideas in Song of the Earth, we talk about one of his most well-known collaborations, which was with the Icelandic singer Björk on the album Mount Wittenberg, Orca. As Dave talks about in the episode, the music was written with the idea of the singers as a pod of whales, with Björk being the mother whale. Really awesome. I remember hearing it when it came out in 2011, but the meaning and the impact expanded in sort of the context and the themes of Ecosystem Member when I was re-listening to it to prepare for this episode. Toward the end of this episode, we also discussed the new film Dave scored called The Legend of Ochi. As of this recording, it hasn't hit my local theater yet in Texas, but it is backed by A24, so I think we can safely assume that it is definitely worth checking out. Dave is a super smart guy and thoughtful dude, and I hope you appreciate his openness in discussing his work and experience as much as I did during this conversation. So without further delay, here's the latest episode of the Ecosystem Member Podcast with Dave Longstreth. Today on the Ecosystem Member Podcast, we are excited to be joined by Dave Longstreth, songwriter, producer, band leader. Probably heard the name from Dirty Projectors. The latest project is Song of the Earth, which you can probably assume that's the reason we got in touch to talk to him today. So thanks for joining us on Ecosystem Member, Dave.
Rick, it's so cool to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So we always like to start with this frame of, as a human, how do you think about your relationship with nature and the more than human world?
I love that question. We had a friend from France staying with us recently, and she was telling us about this kind of nascent ecological movement in France that's called like the Coalition of the Living, which I love. It feels like it frames humans in the context of our planet in a similar way that your question does, taking us a little bit out of our anthropocentric frame and acknowledging and respecting the intrinsic value and beauty of all life and just the the complex interdependence of all of this. So I love that, the coalition of the living.
I dig that. I'm definitely going to Google that as soon as we get off to find out more about that. It sounds really awesome. So, Song of the Earth is your latest sort of project, which was commissioned by, I think, a Berlin based chamber orchestra called Stargaze. And I read that you wrote the first draft in 6 weeks, sort of at a really interesting point where you're becoming a father, and then we had the COVID pandemic at that same time. So, like, what was it about this moment that you said, this is the project I need to work on and work on so crazily and so intensely for those 6 weeks?
Yeah, it was a gut feeling. I think that I was I was trying to connect with what felt most urgent to me and most necessary, and it just felt so clearly like it was our relationship with the planet, and really sort of clarifying, looking back on my own songwriting and things that nature, natural places, wilderness, uh, have been such a source of inspiration and deep feeling for me. And so to make Song of the Earth felt like exploring that at a new altitude. So that's part of it. The other part of it is that I was thinking in my mind of the Gustav Mahler orchestral song poem Das Lied von der Erde, the Song of the Earth, and I was thinking about what a Song of the Earth would be, now.
That's really interesting. And I think it's kind of funny because you talked about that idea, coalition of the living, thinking about our relationship with the planet. And we have this guy on who we're actually going to talk to again this season. His name's Jeff Perry from Angel City Lumber. And he talked about it being
cool.
One of the gang. Like that's he talks to trees, not in like a unhealthy way, but in a very healthy way of like being a part of that relationship. And I thought it was really interesting because I read that you wanted to find something beyond sadness with Song of the Earth.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily, I've heard that, like you said, it's not necessarily a climate change opera, which is, I mean, perfect for how I wanted to think about this question about our relationship with the planet. So, like, when you think about that coalition of living, the relationship with the planet, what did you find making this work that took it beyond sadness and beyond that usual sort of climate change conversation?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to be honest, when it comes to songwriting, um, I can be skeptical of things that have a message. Songwriting is a song is like a dream a lot of the time, and it feels most real when there's something about its contour that is blurry, and intuitive. There's certainly a place for message songs, and sort of like explicitly protest music has a huge cultural value and everything. But that's not what I set out to do with Song of the Earth. I was thinking about the Gustav Mahler piece, and because I don't speak German, I was really approaching it first and foremost just as the sound of it, the sound of the music, and what I got from the music mirrored in a way the things that we're talking about, the hugeness of the scope and the breadth of the expression, from the tiniest, like harp playing quietly in its low register to just the entire orchestra playing at double forte, um, and yeah, so the sort of like scope of this thing felt like a landscape. It felt like a world, and emotionally it's covering the sort of spectrum of like human emotion, but there are parts of it also that just feel so vast that it's like looking at a wilderness where you're like, what is being in a wilderness? Like, is this hostility? Is this indifference? Is this some sort of great unity or love that I can't even understand? Um, and then getting further into the libretto of Song of the Earth, which are kind of like contemporary German translations of classical Chinese poetry. And a lot of it is kind of nature poetry, and it is sort of Buddhist in tone, emphasizing the transition, state change, death and rebirth through a lot of nature metaphors. So when I started out writing Song of the Earth, I was thinking of it in those veins. I was thinking about just writing music that had these kind of organic contours and the shape and the feeling of being in nature. And then when I began to write the words, I was thinking just of nature poetry and nature odes, specific observation about the natural world, about wind blowing through trees and small brooks emptying into a lake, that kind of thing. But the deeper I got into it, the more I sort of came to realize that my feelings about nature, the words that I was finding to describe nature, were shot through with this kind of anxiety and brokenness and apprehension. And it's really through watching that show up in my writing that that I was really led to the idea of, okay, like, I'm writing about our fractured relationship with nature. I'm writing about climate. And so yeah, I came to this not out of this sort of activist sense of wanting to write climate anthems, but through this intuitive sort of subtext layer. And so that was my way in. So now I'm on this journey of thinking about my relationship with nature, and maybe specifically how it's been atomized and fractured and sort of damaged by being one way or another, by being a participant in this destructive series of systems of industrial humanity and extractive capitalism and the rest of it. And, one of the things that I found was deep within my own sort of wiring, my human wiring, was an antagonism toward nature. I think going back to maybe this rooted in this sort of caveman fear, and then enshrined in our some of our earliest kind of cultural documents. The Bible says, thou shalt go forth and subdue the earth. I don't know if it's thou shalt, but yeah, go forth and subdue the earth. And as a sort of imperative at one point in human prehistory, I guess that made sense. There were megafauna predators out there who were going to eat your village, and river floodplains that would wipe out your community. And so yeah, I mean, how far back does that go? Our desire, our rooted, uh, yeah, like enmity with nature that you see not expressed so dominantly and so aggressively in an American society. Um, and beneath that, I did find, I think, a kind of longing for oneness, you know, and an awareness that we are all connected. Um, that that we've built these very complex human structures on top of a system that at one point we were a part of, and a dream of humanity that was a productive member of the kind of like world ecosystem, a member of the kind of Gaia concept. What an impossible and kind of naive dream that feels like. But, I felt aware of that. I found a sense of just wonder and mystery for those beautiful, complex webs of interdependence, that make up ecosystems and food chains and everything. And Rick, I wish I could say that I found a deeply rooted sense of optimism and a sort of like well of energy to pursue change. And honestly, I have not found that, and it's one of the reasons that I want to talk to you about it. It's like how the fuck do we do it? you know.
I think it's a really interesting point that you bring up there, and especially the sort of conversation around sort of conditioning and religion and how we have been brought to see nature as this thing to dominate, conquer, but also be afraid of, as you just talked about. And then you mentioned sort of how Gustav Mahler's work, a lot of that pulled from Chinese poetry and has these echoes of Buddhist ideas. And sometimes I was actually very conscious about it with this podcast of like, I try to have as many artists and creatives on as I do like activists, because I think part of it is taking that step back and having our own reflection and sort of, I guess, non-control of like, we can't necessarily influence this positive or negative. And that idea that, because I would have a hard time, believing that a sparrow sits in a tree and thinks that it is going to somehow change the behavior of other animals in its ecosystem or in the wider world. But it inspires a lot of humans, definitely, to pay attention and care about these sort of things. And so when I have these conversations with people, I sometimes actually don't want an answer of like what we should act on or what we should do. It's actually like, let's just sit and talk about this and how we feel about it, how we experience it. Because I think in that reflection, we actually arrive at a point that's probably a more healthy relationship with understanding how we relate to the natural world. It was interesting because I was reading about Gustav Mahler's work, and he had just lost his eldest daughter and his post at the director of the Vienna Court Opera. And then he was diagnosed with a congenital heart defect. And there's sort of this, like, in the work, this facing death, but also being inspired by the beauty of the earth and these translations, these Chinese poems that you mentioned. Like, you kind of talked a little bit about some of the tensions that you faced when you were going through that already, but were there any others where you were just trying to, I don't know, whether it was wrapping your head around the original work or wrapping your head around how you wanted to express the feelings or the thoughts you had? Like, what tensions were you feeling when you were working through this process?
Well, I guess one thing was really it was a wild moment to find. This is before I started writing the piece, but in that first year of the pandemic, my wife was pregnant, and in the fall of 2020, when there were terrible wildfires in Central California, and the smoke came down here to LA, and it was just very, very intense. Basically blacking out the sky in the middle of the day, and really making the worst air quality I'd ever experienced in my life. And I had lived in New York in LA for 6 or 7 years at that point, and I had never experienced anything like this. And my neighbors and friends who had been here their whole lives hadn't either. And this sense that there was nowhere to go because it's just in the air that we breathe. There's no escape from it. And adding to that, like my wife being pregnant, that was claustrophobic. That was a really uncomfortable feeling. And then, we got on a plane and burned however much more carbon that was to go up to Alaska. And that contrast of suddenly being in Alaska and being in that air and being in this, this lush sort of boreal rainforest was insane. And so that experience, that contrast, made its way into some of the words that I wrote for Song of the Earth. Another tension is just the sense of futility, but also I worried hollowness in approaching songwriting about nature in this way. At the end of the day, I am making something that is going to be a physical product, vinyl pressed onto, into cardboard and sold and streamed on the internet, downloaded using electricity. People will drive cars to see me tour. I hope to and most of the time I can land in a position similar to the one that you just articulated, that there is a value in us talking about these things. And I do feel that can be a form of protest, if not resistance, to the dominant culture that we're a part of, that has somehow entrained us not to think about these very simple input-output relationships of our consumerism and collectively our depletion of resources, non-renewable resources, and our contribution to pollution, oceanic pollution, and the whole thing. So I feel that we are entrained not to think about it, not to think about the way we live and how it affects the world that we live in. And of course, we're entrained not to think about it because the system is predicated on us not worrying about it, not thinking about it. So hopefully there is a value in just kind of one at a time, each of us raising our hand and saying, hey, I think about this all the time. And this is crazy. And what are we doing? And can we do anything else?
Yeah, so listening to you talk about that, I'm sort of curious, was there a point in your life where you did start to think about and examine this relationship and examine the systems? Is it more recent? Has it been something you've been thinking about for a while? Was there some specific event or thing you read or author you appreciated that kicked that into motion?
Well, I think probably have to credit my parents and my family in just footing me this way. This being my kind of footing to the world a little bit. They are really into natural history. They're really into bird watching. They're really into they took us on outdoorsy stuff. My brother and I. Our whole lives. So, from a very early age, I have had the experience of just being renewed in nature, and just to be on a long hike, in a kind of cathedral of deciduous trees, or swimming in the ocean and getting just moved by being part of a huge current. This is sort of as close as it gets to religion for me. So yeah, I think that's sort of in the way I grew up, and then and yeah, I wish that literature were more a part of it for me, like Edward Abbey. I love, um, uh, yeah, but I want to read more. I want to read more about it, and particularly like in this sort of contemporary context.
That's awesome. Yeah, I find that I've had a lot of people, not necessarily like professional surfers, but I've had a lot of surfers on. And I used to live in Venice, and my favorite thing when I lived in Venice Beach was just getting barreled by a wave. Like
Yeah.
I didn't even care as much about actually getting on the wave as much as just like feeling the force of a wave like take me over. And
Wow.
you're just it's one of those moments, I think, kind of like what you're describing, where you've lost complete control of it. You come out the other side of it and you're fine.
Yeah.
But it's definitely an experience, and I credit Terry Tempest Williams, the author. Have you read any of her stuff?
No, I haven't. I've heard her name. Where should I start with her?
Erosion is her most recent book, and it's fantastic. I mean, she was a huge inspiration for me. I grew up in the Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts and camping and
Yeah.
all of that, but I think there was a transition point, probably 8 or 9 years ago, where I actually started to think about this relationship more beyond just like a place I go and a thing that I am a part of, is kind of where that transition happened. And that it's interesting because one of your songs on Song of the Earth, Uninhabitable Earth, actually has you singing the opening paragraph of that book. Why did you choose that book? Why did you choose that passage? Like, how did you come to that point of being like, this is so meaningful to me that I need to express this on this great piece of music that I'm creating in this album?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. First, I just want to back up and say I love your description of just like, yeah, not really caring about whether you get up on the wave. You just want the feeling of getting barreled by the wave.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I love that. I love that description. Like, yeah, we can't go in the Malibu, in the water in Malibu, Santa Monica right now because the fire is just
Hmm.
really effed up. But I've gotten really into just swimming in years prior along that stretch, and just being just far out enough that that swell is passing through you before crashing, closer to the beach. And it's so fun to just be like doing the crawl or the breaststroke or whatever, and then just feel that surge whip through your the line of where I'm swimming, just like a big electrical surge. It's just it's such a cool feeling. Um, but okay, so yeah, yeah, the David Wallace-Wells book, it's called the song is called "Uninhabitable Earth," paragraph one, because it is basically a word for word setting of paragraph one of the Uninhabitable Earth. Um, and it's the first kind of song that we released from this album, and so it's occurring to me as we're talking that if you happened to hear, catch that little moment and hear that song, and now you're hearing me talk about how I arrived at, you know, Song of the Earth, you know, through a accidental, intuitive subtext, you might say, "Wait, what? Um, what are you talking about?" But yeah, for me, like, I worked on the piece for after that initial kind of manic burst that we were talking about. Then I took about 3 years of kind of rewriting, re-recording, making up all new melodies, and cutting things out, looping some other parts, uh, really finding the shape of it at that point. And through that kind of slower part of the process, um, it occurred to me at one point, like, okay, like, yeah, this is what this is about. This is um, about nature. It's about the planet. It's about our relationship with the planet. And I felt like at that point I could, maybe raise the stakes is the wrong term, but like to create these tent poles in the album where I'm really pushing to the extreme one dynamic or one pole or the other, then it made the whole thing feel, more like itself, more like what I was trying to push it toward. And so, and that's when the David Wallace-Wells song came into the picture, because where I was like, oh, this belongs on this album. Weirdly, I had written that song just more or less at the same time as the rest of this stuff. Summer of 2020, I think. Summer of 2021, maybe. And I've been like, oh, that's something else. That's a different thing. That's not part of Song of the Earth. But yeah, I realized, like, it's okay that this is so topical. This is so explicit. There's no poetry. There is a kind of poetry, but it's a brutal poetry. This is, saying the quiet part loud or whatever. This is the moment where, there's no subtext. This is just literally ripped from the headlines. So that was kind of like structurally what felt like the value of having a song like that. And then, what brought me to the David Wallace-Wells was, it was just shocking. It's a shocking paragraph. He thought of his book, I think, as a polemic. And I think that he was trying to break from the orthodoxy of science communication around climate that had been the sort of norm for the prior 20 or 30 years, which is that, I think that probably it would be best to find an interview with him or a podcast or something like that, but this is me just paraphrasing, but my understanding is that, scientists would be doing studies and making projections from there about the trajectory of global warming. And what they would find was frequently so alarming, so shocking, the range of possible outcomes, that when they were reporting, to the mass media or whatever, they would consistently report toward the lower end of the spectrum of possible outcomes, so that they didn't sound crazy, and so that they didn't lose credibility if they made these wild doomsday predictions, and then they didn't bear out immediately. And I think what David Wallace-Wells saw was that the world in the middle of the 20-teens was starting to pull away from what we had been told about global warming into something more extreme, something that was happening faster and more violently. And so he wanted to make this polemic book that wasn't, that was equally factual, scientific, but just emphasized, a different part of the message of the prior 30 years of climate science. So the book has great authority, and it just feels shocking to read that first paragraph. And it really resonated with me because it's how I felt. It harmonized. This is not the best way of saying this, but it harmonized with my own sort of intuitions, And specifically the structure, the way he wrote that first paragraph with this long sort of Homeric list, it felt like a song already. It felt like it had such a musical structure that it basically set itself to music.
It actually, I think it kind of leads into another thing that I wanted to talk about. So, my wife and I found out that we're having our first kid in October.
Congrats.
And thank you. And you just mentioned bringing your own child into the world. Like,
yeah.
And then we just were talking about David Wallace-Wells and Uninhabitable Earth, which is, excuse my language, fucking shocking.
Yeah.
No one's stopping me from cursing, but I was just trying to reduce that, hence the child thing as well, trying to be a better example. But
Yeah.
has that, has having a child changed how you think about nature, how you want to impart some of this thinking to them, or how you think about climate change, and does that has that changed just how you approach this entire topic and subject?
Yeah. Well, this is the first thing that I've completed since having a kid. Um, and I think from the perspective of being an artist, um, the way having a kid, one of the things that makes me, one of the things that underscores is just the importance of spending time on what I truly care about. Um, and I think that's one of the reasons I found my way here immediately. Um, and from the perspective of just being a father now, with respect to climate, I mean, we're up against forces that are so much stronger than us. And so it's even difficult to say, I want to be making the world a better place for her. Uh, you know, we need to do that, to go fully into the sort of feeling of powerlessness and pessimism. Honestly, it's been a positive thing in making this piece, is that it focuses me around my own feeling of powerlessness and pessimism about our future, ecologically speaking. It forces me to focus on it. And maybe I can do something with that focus. In the sense that, I'm powerless, though. Like you're saying, I'm just a sparrow sitting in a tree. Why would I expect that I can change the behavior of species around me? Although I don't totally. To me, that's not a parallel. It's not a parallel thing. In any case, what it makes me cognizant of is just wanting to share the things that I love, with my daughter, and one of those is, swimming in the ocean. Hiking through a overgrown valley in Vermont.
I think it's interesting because what you've talked about here is sort of the powerlessness and the pessimism, and sort of seeing the system, and especially the systems we built, which, to your point, that's where the kind of comparison I was making with the sparrow and the tree kind of falls apart, because the sparrow has never extracted fossil fuels from the ground and then built an economy entirely reliant on burning massive amounts of those fossil fuels.
Yeah.
My in-laws are ornithologists. They study the white-crowned sparrow. They've never told me about anything like that. So to my knowledge, that's where that kind of falls down.
Amazing.
But I will to sort of challenge the pessimism and powerfulness. I wanted to talk about another one of your projects that you collaborated with Bjork on, Mount Wittenberg Orca.
Yeah.
Which I'm going to tell you, when I started listening to that, especially now in the context of today and preparing for this interview over the last few weeks, On and Ever Onward, and these songs actually, I guess it's partially because of the frame I have now than when I originally heard it, but they actually fill me with optimism, and I can kind of move forward with this as almost like fuel, because it's relating to the world in a different way. And I think that's where music actually plays a really powerful role when we think about activism, is that you can imbue feeling in people that you can't always do just with words. And that's what I think that collection of songs does really, really well. So like, Song of the Earth, we've talked a little bit about what you're thinking about when you're making that and some of the tensions you're exploring, like that work, the lyrics, but also the music. Like, what were you thinking about putting that album together?
Yeah, totally. Definitely. I want to back up again just to talk about what you were saying about the White Crowned Sparrow. Is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I've read a couple of the books of that guy Yuval Noah Harari.
Yeah.
The Sapiens
Mm-hmm.
is so amazing, and I read Homo Deus, and his frame. I think it's mainly in Homo Deus. Although they definitely feel like a continuum of the same sort of like general idea. The idea that we have made ourselves into gods, through our technology, we have acquired godlike powers, things that earlier prior generations of humans, historical humans, prehistoric humans, would regard as either magic or godlike powers. We have them. Millions of us on Earth have them. And so, you know, it feels like something out of Greek myth or something like, why can't we use some of those god powers to heal the goddamn planet? Why can we only destroy with them? Why are they only destructive in their scope, or so often destructive in their scope? And like, rhetorically I'm phrasing that in the negative, but like there is hope there. There is
Mm-hmm.
power there, and there's optimism. We can do this. We have the collective brilliance and power and ingenuity and whatever else to fix these problems. I'm talking about, global warming, but you know, the sort of the array of it, the forever chemicals and the plastic, and the fact that we're in the midst of this extinction event, and the sort of like petro organization. We can fix all of this stuff. We truly can. um and that's important to remember. It's not impossible, and it's not inevitable. It's not impossible, and it's not inevitable that we all just take the planet to fucking hell. Um, so there is hope there for me.
Good. I'm glad to hear
Um,
that.
yeah, yeah. I mean, we have of course we can. Um, it just involves the targeted removal. No, I'm just kidding.
We're gonna get
Um,
real scientific for a minute. On
Yeah,
that.
no, but I was gonna get real Hollywood on it. I was gonna, but telling a dramatic like story of a vigilante, environmental vigilante or something like that.
Yeah,
How come
Ed
there's
Abbey,
not like?
Monkey Wrench Gang.
Oh, what is that? I don't know about that.
Monkey Wrench Gang. They've been talking about making a movie of that for a while. Ed
I don't
Abbey's
know
book.
what that. I don't know what that is. The Edward Abbey book.
Yeah. No, you definitely need to check that one out. A little monkey wrenching is a great
Oh,
tactic. I think, especially for online engagement. But that's a whole other conversation.
that's very cool. Yeah, and why isn't that like, there's this Hollywood is wringing its hands over the absence of like original IP and stuff. It's like, let's get a Monkey Wrench Gang franchise going. God damn.
Yeah, make
Um,
some phone calls. I'm sure you've got a few Hollywood connections out there in LA.
but well, what I was going to say is that, yes, another thing that I'm optimistic about, hopeful about is, and that I do believe is in the power of even an extension of what we're doing here, talking, um, making art that can change minds, that can open possibilities, that can motivate, and that can move us as a collective humanity in a different direction. Of course, it's I think it must be some sort of survival strategy psychology for me to be able to do this on the one hand, but no, I do feel that way in my heart. I feel that way, and so yeah. In Song of the Earth, I would say in sum says yes. It affirms the feeling of Song of the Earth on the whole. The sum of its pluses and minuses. It's for me, it's an affirmation, and and sort of most so in that second to last song, called the Blue of Dreaming, which started as a lullaby to my daughter, and it's just kind of a paean to in kind of, you know the concept level of like a young child, an ode to the interconnectedness of our world, and the beauty of it, and the improbable privilege of being a part of it. And so yeah, and so to talk about Mount Wittenberg Orca a little bit, it's kind of the same, there wasn't really much of a real life narrative, so kind of inciting to make that, but for me it's just, yeah, it's about the joy of the ocean, and the joy of imagining, the singers in the band as kind of like a pod of whales, with like Bjork being the whale mother. There's certainly, I think, a message of unity in a unity with the planet, and a kinship with our, our brothers and sisters in the ocean.
Yeah, beautiful mother, and that sort of empathy of the, look at me going through the waves, look at me playing in the waves. I mean, it's honestly like, I don't know how I don't think I can ever listen to that song without a smile on my face. I feel like it's so, I would challenge anyone to listen to that and not feel empathy for orcas or really any other non-human animal. I feel like it just puts you in this mindset of like, sure, we don't know exactly what they're thinking when they're swimming through the ocean, but you can kind of guess that they're probably having a little bit of fun, right? Like, it can't be all sad.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I don't know if I need to project, sort of anthropocentric emotions at them. I don't know what they're thinking, but I mean, of course they experience joy and togetherness, playfulness, all those things. Of course, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess that literally I do anthropomorphize them. They're like having a conversation and stuff. But
Well, if you want to think about that topic a little bit more, we had Melanie Challenger on the podcast, who wrote a great book called How to Be Animal, and she looks at the whole anthropocentrism thing and anthropomorphism. She's way more qualified and well researched to actually talk about it, so her books are great.
Wow, what's her name?
Melanie Challenger.
Melanie Challenger. Cool.
Yeah. So I wanted to sort of bring the conversation to close on a little bit of a fun question. So I had a musician and composer named Madam Gandhi, Karen Gandhi, on the podcast a few episodes ago. She made this like splice pack out of melting glacier sounds, and it was one of the best-selling splice packs on the platform. And she's done some amazing songs since then, and I think she was in the Amazon and the rainforest actually right before we recorded. And I asked her this, so I'd just be curious, as someone who is so musically inclined, like, is there a non-human animal, or it might not even be an animal, it could be a river or a stream or something like that, like, I grew up hearing like Whale Sounds albums, which are quite corny in like the 80s and 90s. But like she makes really cool versions of that. So if you could collaborate with some non-human living entity, what would it be? Like, do you have any thoughts around that? Have you thought about it before?
I mean, it's a really interesting question. And yeah, I can remember like an assembly in middle school where we had a cellist come in and like duet with whale song. And like, I love that. I love that. And I love, yeah, I mean, whale song is so beautiful. That mournful, uh, the quality of it is just, is emotional. It's emotional. Um, and honestly, the first thing that comes to mind when you're asking that question is this movie that I just scored, that just came out on Friday. Here we are on Monday, taping. That is really about, the movie is called The Legend of Ochi, and it's really about this, the relationship between this teenage girl and this like ape creature that she finds in the forest outside her village. It's in the world of the film. It's called an ochi. You know, it's part of a sort of yeti-like species. But these ochi communicate through song, basically, and the director's vision in this film is that the ochi communicate through, in musical terms, it's called hocketing, where a sort of single melodic line, you know, say it's composed of 8 notes, the melodic line is broken up between 2 or more different voices. And so if we had that 8 note pattern, maybe I would get the odd numbers 1, 3, 5, and 7, and you might get the even 2, 4, 6, and 8. And together I'm going up, 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 and together we're completing the single phrase, but it's broken up across the two of us, and in our way we each have an independent line. And so in the world of this film, the ochi, their they communicate. The content of their messages comes together like a key and a lock through the activity of this hocketing, which is a beautiful it's a beautiful idea about that interconnectedness, that is really so hugely one of the models that we can take from nature in this century, the model of collaboration and empathy. So I love that. I love that about the Ochi language. When we're talking about the actual world and actual species, I mean, yeah, I would really want to like give it some thought. I mean, the idea of making these spice packs out of natural sounds is that's really fascinating. And I think that, even if you're just making them into a beat or something, maybe they have some of the provenance of that source, God, I'd really have to like think about it. I was just in Big Sur last week, and I saw this huge wingspan. And it looked bigger than a turkey vulture to me. And then somebody brought to my attention, like, there are California condors in this area. And that really stirred my heart, because I remember like reading National Geographics in the late 80s and 90s as a kid, and being so worried about the California condor. So the fact that they're on the Central Coast and they're just like living their lives is so beautiful. And it seemed, this condor was riding a thermal out, half over the ocean, it seemed like, and half over this sort of cliffside. And I was just thinking about how solitary and silent and remote that condor's world would be, how alien it felt to me. And to like live at that altitude, at that remove, like all the time. So now I'm thinking about maybe, yeah, something with the condor, And I bet they're very quiet sounds. Are they loud even? So you'd have some like small mics somehow in the nest, and you'd be catching these small little utterances. I don't know. Okay, the California condor. That's what I'm going to say.
Awesome. It's totally unexpected. I've recorded with a couple other musicians and usually get like dolphins or something, and it seems kind of obvious. Like nothing against dolphins. I'm sure people have genuine affection for dolphins, but California condor is like a really unique answer that I very much appreciate. So that's awesome. Hopefully that happens one day. So thank you so much, Dave, for joining us to talk today. I can't wait to get this out, and I definitely want to check out the film. Like you said, it came out last Friday. I haven't had a chance to see it yet, but I was reading about it and super intrigued. And obviously, with you're talking about with the language and the fact that you scored that film, like had a huge influence on that. So I'm really excited to check it out. And thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, Rick, awesome to talk to you, and thank you for doing what you're doing. And a pleasure to be here today.